Snippets presents Panic, written by Anita Sarin, read by Brenda Charlow. Every summer, Helena traveled from heat-soaked Athens to the hillsides overgrown with beech trees and carpeted with yellow celandine. She drank from cold, clear streams that gurgled through the limestone cliffs, inhaled the scent of black pine and orange lilies with crimson hearts, and she painted. But no matter how many canvases she filled, something eluded her. She was painting a lone chamois, poised gracefully on the edges of the cliff, when she heard the music, a sweet, haunting melody. Her body moved of its own will as she rose from her easel and walked toward the sound. It seemed to Helena that the early evening sun, hovering over the valley, was waiting for her to make the most important discovery of her life. He was leaning against a great plane tree, holding panpipes to his lips, eyes closed in some private ecstasy. She noticed navy slacks that accentuated his muscled thighs, and a white shirt with sleeves rolled up to show his hairy, sinewy forearms. His dark, wavy hair fell to his broad shoulders. His waist was narrow. And she wanted him. Her sudden longing surprised her. The music made her restless. She wanted to touch that face so rugged with its heavy brows, an aquiline nose, yet so tender in the mouth. At length he stopped playing and opened dark eyes to look at her. He slung the instrument on its embroidered strap across his shoulder and said in a deep, low voice that recalled all the voices she'd ever heard when in deep repose, "I've been waiting for you, Helena." Waiting? For me? Around them a sudden wind arose, chilling her to the bone, and she shivered. "How do you know my name?" "I just know." He smiled, teeth startling white in a tanned face. "Forgive me, but I do not welcome questions unless absolutely necessary. You will understand." She blushed. "I'm sorry." He straightened up and reached for her hand. She allowed him to hold it, but only for an instant, for a strange wild energy rose through her arm and clasped her heart. She'd never felt this way before at the touch of a man. She was suddenly aware of her breasts, thrusting through the thin fabric of her dress, the smooth skin of her bare arms, the softness of her chestnut hair as it swirled down her back. "You play beautifully. It's a wonderful instrument." She looked at the pipes and saw that his chest was matted with hair. She wanted to lay her head upon it. "I made it," he said. "Then you have many talents." "You're an artist, I see." He glanced at her fingers stained with paint. "I'm a student of art, if I can call myself that." She paused, and with a sigh added, looking not at him but down at the sharp-edged leaves of the plane tree and its spiky fruit at their feet. "I know what I must live for. I feel what I must live for, but when I think about it, I'm not so sure. Will you help me?" Will you learn?" "Try me," she smiled. "I will. If you show me what you paint." "I would have never let the paint dry," said Helena, dipping her brushes into a can of turpentine. "But I heard you play, and I had to find you." He looked at the painting, and after a long pause said softly, "The divine spark of life remains. It does not die. It is the husk that changes, and with it, old habits are discarded so that the divine may reveal itself." Helena did not understand his meaning, but trusting that one day she would, she followed him back into the deep woods. He told her to feel the foliage as they passed, feel intimately, the veins, the textures, till she pricked her fingers upon the plain leaves. He put her fingers into his warm mouth and sucked the drops of blood off them, and she grew aroused at the thought of his mouth on hers. She saw how the bark of the plane trees peeled away in great plates, revealing creamy white trunks. The vermilion pollen on the stamens of orange lilies painted her fingertips. The wild roebuck knew him, so tender and unafraid, their coat shaggy with the remnants of winter, but she would not ask him the reason. Just as she would not ask him his name, and the slivers of sky through the trees blazed orange. In the twilight, they arrived at a log cabin. He pushed open the door, its heavy hinges creaking, and lit the tall candles in their silver candlesticks that stood upon a table against the wall. The fragrance of lavender filled the air. At one end of the cabin was a kitchen, bright with herbs, dry flowers, and bulbs of garlic hanging from the beams. Upon wooden shelves gleamed copper utensils. At the other end, near a window with blue curtains, stood a large double bed, almost filling the space. With its abundance of pillows, its patchwork quilt and downy blankets, it looked sumptuous. The only other furniture in the cabin was a table in the middle, flanked by 4 exquisitely carved, high-backed, armless chairs. Helena thought, here was a man of mystery, a completely sensual man who seemed to know everything. He turned to her in the candlelight, and the scent of flowers breezed in through the windows. The light made the dark hair on his chest gold. "Is your hand healed?" he asked, and lifting her hand to his lips, kissed it gently. She trembled and did not speak. His lips traveled up her arm to her shoulder, and he was peeling off her dress, her undergarments, baring her skin, kissing each part that revealed itself to him. She felt so limp with surrender that she could not bring herself to unbutton his shirt and undo his belt. They sank together into the softness of the bed, and flowers bloomed inside her as finally he kissed her mouth, his tongue exploring. In the darkness outside, hundreds of eyes glinted like stars. Helena was amazed at how aroused she had been even before he kissed her on the lips. Her thighs ached with their bouts of lovemaking. And then there were strawberries and fresh succulent mangoes with whipped cream and feta cheese, and she asked him how he'd come by the mangoes. In answer, he licked the juice from her bruised lips. Who was he? In the 6 months that followed, his voracious hunger for her did not fade. Their lovemaking would often become an orgy of food, drink, and sensation. He drank wine from her navel, ate fruit from her mouth, and licked honey off her skin. And she, who had believed that the greatest of loves had eluded her, thought that she'd finally found a lover she could revere and adore. When she visited her room in the village guest house to fetch more paint or a change of clothes, the villagers seemed to shun her. Even those who had greeted her on the narrow cobbled streets looked away when she approached. She wondered about this change in their behavior. Perhaps they knew of the strange young man in the woods who played the panpipes and kept to himself. Perhaps they could not understand why she'd taken him for a lover, this creature who was so aloof and so wild, whose music filled them with unease when they gathered firewood. She did not care. All that mattered was the passion she shared with her mysterious lover, whose embraces made her feel like a vibrating violin string. One afternoon, she persuaded him to accompany her to the village, tempting him with the thought of delicious pastry filled with feta cheese and stuffed peppers. She wanted the villagers to perceive him like she did. He was not one to inspire fear. He was a gentle being who knew the intimacies of all things wild. He taught her how to turn her paintings into masterpieces. But when they walked together, the sky turned suddenly heavy, as though it were bearing down upon them. Their garments bloomed about them, yet there was no breeze. Masses of lightning tore through the pink clouds, striking the earth. The people, terrified, ran into their whitewashed houses. Some, unable to move, stared heavenwards. All that Helena touched seemed warm, his hand in hers, their clothes, the rough walls of the houses, yet he seemed unconcerned. She raised her face to the sky and stuck out her tongue, expecting rain, but there was not a drop. "I created an electrical storm," he said. "Now they'll have more to talk about." She wondered at his words. Perhaps he was no ordinary mortal. Perhaps, she thought, he was a god. He had made the panpipes. He had created a storm. In his hands her art had become like life. She'd suspected it all along. He had chosen her. And laughing like children, they ran hand in hand into the woods. Yet Helena knew that she could neither possess him nor forever match his passion. She would age, and he would be forever youthful. But she now understood what he'd meant when he'd spoken of the divine spark within, and her life would never again be ordinary. Having known diamonds, who would pick up pebbles? She left him without a goodbye. It would have been too ordinary. When at the village dance, oblivious to the singing, dancing, and drinking around her, Helena sat beneath the harvest moon, painting by the light of the lamps. The villagers once again took her to their hearts. Her hands moved of their own accord as she recreated the electrical storm and the two figures walking under the sky overcast with pink clouds, rent by lightning. They saw that the student of art, whose face now shone with an inner light, had become a great artist. And surely the strange young man with the panpipes had something to do with her transformation. They would never forget that afternoon of the storm, so great in its enormity, and yet so gentle to the land. And then they heard the music of the panpipes and were filled with joy. And ever after, they would leave offerings of fruit and fresh-baked bread for Helena's mysterious lover. To hear additional audio shorts, visit snippets.com.